Mark Moyer with Win Again. Super excited and happy and thrilled to have you all here. We have a nice big crowd for this event. And I'm super excited because I've got two fantastic people that will really impress you with what they know about not just assessments, but also really how to apply values towards your business, towards your career, towards anything. So without further delay, I'm going to actually make the introduction first, so they don't blush when I talk about all these fantastic things. But Tonja Hadley is a performance coach, and yes, she's got 28 years of experience. Now, clearly, she started when she was 6 years old, as you'll be able to tell. But she's been coaching, she's been in leadership, she's been in business, and she's got a big, diverse background in a whole wide variety of things. I mean, she's had experiences working in college sports, in professional sports, she's been involved in the fitness side, exercise equipment, sporting goods, real estate. She's done it all. She really knows her stuff. She also holds a master's degree in, this is pretty impressive, sports management. She's got, and I'm gonna have to look up here and read this, the CSCS and CSPS certifications. That ain't easy, folks, and she's got it. In addition to being a certified axiology, which is not the study of axles, she'll tell you about that, behaviors and motivations practitioner. So holy cow, that's a lot. So I'm impressed. And batting second, Michael Hartman. He goes by Mike, or Mr. Hartman, or Sir, or whatever. He's a performance mindset coach. He's an online e-learning trainer. He's a speaker. He's also an ex-professional athlete, although I think you're always a professional athlete somehow. Anyways, and he not only overcame the odds and fought his way through many, many hardships along the way, but this is a guy who didn't just make it to the NHL, but for 17 years, he was always playing on a championship team at a variety of levels. So he's got that absolute mindset, which is really fantastic. He works with athletes now. He works with business professionals. He works with all kinds of people to become what he says, a champion of your own life, right? Which is fantastic. He is certified in axiological profiles, behaviors, DISC, motivators. And he was certified by, ready for this, the National Academy of Sports Medicine. Now that's pretty damn cool too. So Mike, why don't you come in also? And we'll start this show and get on the road. So hello, Michael.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes, and hey, Tonja, perfect. All right. So thanks for being here. You guys are amazing, fantastic, all that stuff. But I think what I want to, right off the bat, what I'd like to tee up for both of you, and I'll let however you want to, each of you tee off with it. But I think people have a tendency to, when they see the word values, what are your values? Who are, people are like, well, I have lots of values, but sometimes it's really hard to pinpoint them. And more importantly, it's hard to pinpoint them well enough to know, well, how do they really apply to what I do? Like, am I doing something that I can apply my values or not? What's the very first step, each of you to even get that started?
Well, you want to start, Tonja, or do you want me to start?
You can go ahead. I'll follow you.
Okay. Well, we always look, the very first step is about anything is having a baseline. And we use an assessment tool. That's the very first step. And I tell people it's not a crystal ball. It doesn't change a lot about, the conversation in the coaching. We just want to get a baseline of where you are now and where you want to be. And how do you value the situation? How do you value things in your life? And people always would ask me, is this a Myers-Briggs? I said, no, it's not a personality assessment. Or it does talk a little bit about your personality. Is it a DISC? Well, we also do DISC, but it's not so much the behavioral. It's how do you value it? How do you value things in your own life? How do you value people around you, teammates in sports? And Tonja's, with her background, is being a baseball coach. Tonja, how did you first thing, what did you look for in a baseball player and their values?
Yeah, that's a good question. And to be honest with you, probably throughout my coaching career, I looked at behaviors and I looked at motivators, right? We first look at a person's behavior, recruiting or hiring for that matter, for those of you that aren't in sports. You're going to look at the behaviors. And certainly that's a big part of performance. It's a big part of your experience. And then kind of underneath behaviors, you might look at what's behind the behaviors. Well, that's usually a person's motivators, right? What drives them? And so throughout my coaching career, I probably were focused on those two things. And then what people don't know is that Mike got me into this, and I love him for it. And we've become good friends and good partners. But I became fascinated with this because values is sort of that foundational piece. It's the base. It's the baseline of baselines. And so you got to look at a person's values before you can really start to assess their motivations and their behavior. So the answer to your question is I didn't, and I wish I had. So
what's but let me ask you a quick question. It's like list, just for argument's sake, you know, people will be saying, well, what is a value? Like list a couple of, like, I'm just curious, what are a couple of values?
Well, we look at, well, first of all, before we get to the value, we all value different things. Mark, what
Right.
you might value in your life might be the same thing I value. But if we're going to look at it in a sports atmosphere or sports environment, does a player value his teammates, or does he really value himself? Is he an interested teammate, or is he an interesting teammate?
Right. Yeah.
Here's a good example. You went to see Mark Messier speak about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And here, I'll tell you Mark Messier thing. He would walk in the room and he would say, "Hello, everybody. There you are." Instead of walking in and saying, "Hello, everybody. Here I am." And he did that. You know, I like to tell things through stories. And one of the things he did is we had one of our trainers named Benny Patrizzi, and I have to tell it really quick, but Benny was a guy that would wait outside our practice rink in Rye, New York. And I think he was maybe 75, 80 years old. And he was such a nice man. And one day, I don't know if it was Mark or somebody, they invited him in, and somebody needed a towel. So someone said, "I need a towel." So Benny runs over and gets a towel, and the trainers are looking around. They're saying, "Who is this guy?" And I think Mess said it. Mark Messier said, he's part of our team now. Benny was part of our team all the way through. And the very quick of it was in 1994, we won the Stanley Cup. In 95, we got our rings, and it was already done. And then the teams got it and everything, we're like 2 weeks into the season, and Mark Messier calls for a meeting, says, "Everybody come in the room. Benny, where are you?" And Benny is saying, "Oh no, what did I do?" "No, you didn't do anything, Benny. Come out of the room." And Mark puts his arm around him and says, "It takes everybody to win a championship in your family. And here's the ring." It was a box with the Stanley Cup ring for him. And with Belfour, they cracked the rings. So this Benny has a ring, Benny Patrizzi. I don't think he even went to the Garden to the games. If he wanted to, he had tickets, but he was part of our family. So that's part of valuing your teammates. So that's, if you ask me what I value my teammates. I value Tonja and our relationships, because life is built on relationships. So that's, if you ask what I personally value, I look for the good in people. And Tonja could tell you a lot. She's a great person. Tonja, what do you value in people, like within business even?
Yeah, before I answer that, I think it's important too that there's some semantics involved, right? Because we hear the word value and we think moral values. I mean, that's essentially what we all assign. And there certainly are attributes that are values that our assessment tool helps to assess and helps you sort of quantify. But value in this study that we're talking about, it's the science of axiology. We're not going to get into that today, but it is different than psychology. And what values is it's basically our measurable thinking that tells the story of how we assign value or meaning to ourselves and the world around us. And so that's exactly what Mike is saying. He values what's meaningful to him is his relationships with his teammates, his relationship with his partners. And so that's sort of an interesting way, and really the purpose of our program today is to talk about how we assign values. We assign values through the world lens on how we see the world, and through our own self lens and how we see ourselves. And Mike's going to get into that deeper later. But to answer your question, same thing. I've, as a coach, as someone who's passionate about helping people become their best, I think both Mike and I we assign great meaning to relationships.
Now, So what's also interesting is that I think sometimes people say, well, is there an ideal result or results from those assessments that a company will look for? And it's not necessarily an ideal result. They may be trying to put together a group of a variety of people with different results, right? I mean, is it the variety that makes it a better sort of
Okay.
combo, or what do you guys think,
Well,
Mike?
just to backtrack a little bit, we always like to look at, you heard this so many times, especially nowadays, like, what is your why? But we look at the why. Like, why do you do this? Why do you, like in a dental practice is a good example. So if we have any dentists here, like one thing with that dental practice, even everybody's, we said like earlier, is important. And do you value that practice and value it enough that even, let's say, the person at the front desk, when somebody comes in, instead of saying, hey, just sign in, it's how about, hey, how are you? How are you doing? And you're building that, what Tonja said, is that relationship, and that you feel good, because who really wants to go to the dentist? So how do you, if no matter, you could use this assessment in different areas. Now, not to confuse people, we have 74 assessments. We have them for life, business, and sports, but we like to use the life ones because we used to say, especially in sports, if you can't manage yourself or value yourself, how can you value others?
Right.
So we look at the why, we look at the how, we look at the what. And I'm going to get into this a little bit because Tonja mentioned it. We talk about these different views, and we don't like axiology. People say, well, what is axiology? It's the axiom of value. And we look at things like, okay, we'll look at, we used to call it years ago, if you look way back, there was a gentleman by the name of Robert S. Hartman, no relation. He was up for a Nobel Prize. And the assessment's all mathematical. There are a bunch of numbers that come up with your results. And it used to look at it, it still does, but we use different language. It used to look at the intrinsic side or the extrinsic side, which now we call it the worldview, like Tonja said. So we want to know, Mark, how do you look at things from the outside world looking in? And we can get into that a little bit. Then we want to talk about the self view. You use it within your business or life. That's the intrinsic side. So we look at the worldview, the self view, then we have the combined view of both. And mathematically, it comes out where we do have a result. But again, it's really a tool just to help the person, and it's a baseline to show, where are they in their life, and what is lacking, or what are their blind spots.
Yeah,
Okay.
and to tag on to what Mike said, Mark, one of the interesting things that we're able to do with our assessments is, let's say that we have a leadership group, a CEO, a manager of a department, a head coach of a team that sort of has a set profile that they're looking for. We can assess that, we can map out their team, and we can give them a look of what the makeup is of that unit. And also have that as a baseline to compare it to. So it's pretty fascinating what we're able to do with the data.
Well, I think what a lot of people think is that, gee, it seemed like at first, I mean, look, Mike, you played professional hockey, you're a sports guy. Tonja, you've been involved with sports. Oh, this must be for athletes only. But no, quite frankly, it's almost the opposite, where, this is really especially for people that are, anybody really looking to really to grow and elevate and reach another level, right?
Absolutely. I mean, look, both Mike and I, in our experience, obviously we're both from the sports world, but we've also worked with a ton of businesses and business owners, and there's so much parodies and so many things that we can pull from the sports world into the business world. And it definitely applies when you're talking about performance, when you're talking about having a positive experience and having meaning. That applies to any industry.
So before, Mike, I know you want to dive into a couple things, but before you do, I guess I just want to make sure everybody here understands this a little bit better, that, if you take this assessment, I mean, the assessments in general, but this particular one, I think what people are curious about is, well, what happens afterwards? Is there sort of a pile of info that then, let's say Tonja or Mike, you can sort of interpret and turn into, okay, this is what this all means, or how does that work?
Well, I always tell people the assessment is only as good as the person behind it debriefing. I call Tonja an expert. Tanya's been doing this over a year now, but I consider her an expert. I've listened to her debrief, and she can debrief these assessments. She's very modest. I've done over 15,000 assessments. That necessarily means I didn't debrief them all, but I've been through many assessments. So you're only, with somebody behind it giving direction. And then the question is, now what? And we're going to get into the now what later on that Tonja and I do. So we have, you take the assessment and then now what? But the assessment looks at things like, a good example, like for the life values, is going to look at your life judgment and how do you judge things, or how do you, or a little bit about your self-control or your self-worth. Because if you don't value yourself, nobody will. People could read that. The energy we bring into our business is important. And Tonja has a gift, and she doesn't know it yet. I tell her this all the time. I said, Tonja, with your background in business and sports, working with these, a lot of it's confidential, a lot of these different groups that she works with, it's more than just okay, this is your life, what do you do? It's doing things like exercising, working on your breathing. And Tonja can get into that a little bit more, because as an athlete, we just didn't play hockey. We had to do all these other things to prepare. So Tonja can give you some good examples of how you might want to use, after you take the assessment, ways to, someone mentioned stress early on. How do we eliminate stress? And we use this tool to help you and give you other tools so you can maximize your potential. So
yeah, I would agree. I mean, I think I think understanding your values to me is the baseline for every development program you could do. So whether you're in sports or business, you need to know this as your baseline knowledge. And an example is in the weight room. I mean, I bring athletes in. I need to take them through a series of tests. Think about the NFL Combine as another example. We need to evaluate tests so that we have a baseline. What we do with that information is we build and develop programs to help identify gaps and opportunities and to enhance our strengths. And that's the aftermath of the assessment that Mike and I would work with someone on. So.
And sometimes you'll get a report that we have assessments that are the long version. That's 74 pages. And then we have the shorter versions. That's just the axiological, the values part. So we have these combined assessments. But when you're looking at the life, it also you'll see your scores. And the way it works is it's either you overvalue something, that means you put a lot of emphasis on it, or you undervalue it. That may mean you're not paying attention to it. And sometimes we need to pay attention to it. So as an athlete, we need to pay attention to the littlest things and details. I mentioned the dentist earlier because I've worked with a lot of dentists. They can't make a mistake. They need to value what they're doing. And there's so many different areas of here that the life values will look at. One of the things is, how do you work with others? How do you solve problems? And where do you rate on it? Do you undervalue it? Are you balanced in the middle, or do you overvalue it? Sometimes it might sound kind of confusing, but when you overvalue something, you may be carrying like a piano on your back and a lot of stress. Yeah. So we don't really necessarily want to overvalue things. We want to be balanced. So you might hear the cliche, well, you never get too high, you never get too low. We want to be balanced in the middle. And that's how we look at these assessments. And Tonja, you could elaborate on that a little bit more if you like.
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. We talked about the worldview, the self-view, and why this matters. I mean, that's the topic of our conversation, whether you're in business or sport or leadership, kind of understanding not only what you value in the world sense. Mike alluded to the life judgment piece, but understanding other people, understanding being in a social group or a social entity, understanding systems and organization. Those are components of your worldview. From your self-view, then it's that self-composure, self-control that Mike mentioned. A sense of self-worth is a piece of it. Your role, your appreciation of your role, and then lastly, your direction and your purpose. And when you combine these two, right, you really have a almost the full spectrum of yourself and understanding why it is that you do what you do, so that you can then enhance that. And I think that's what the whole purpose of this is about.
So what we do, there's a process, and each coach does it separately. Tonja has a system. I know she has her system. And you know, what I would do is, the first thing I do is, I don't want to know too much about the individual, because I want to see what is in the assessment. So the first thing I do, I used to do a lot of this, is I would do an audio debriefing. So someone takes the assessment, and I would do an audio debriefing. Now that I work with a lot of people, I do it now because Zoom is so big, and Skype, I would do it in a Skype. So the first thing that I do is, okay, we take the assessment and we talk about it. And 99%, I'll say at least 95% of the time, people say, yep, yes, that's me. The second thing, no matter if I'm with a business or I'm with an athlete, I want to know their plan. And every athlete I talk to, I ask them, like a hockey player, what is your plan? Well, a young athlete, my plan is to play junior hockey, college, and pro. Well, no, that's a dream goal. A plan is something actionable that you're going to take steps on to do. So we talk about plans. Like, I'm not looking for a business plan, a plan on how you're going to get better, a plan on how we're going to grow as a person, a plan on how we're going to communicate better with people around us. And then you want to talk about that, Tonja, a little bit about, especially like I know you work with certain businesses, how important it is to have a plan in place.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, you know, as I stated earlier, I think understanding your values gives you that baseline. And then from there, we can develop training programs accordingly. So if we have giant disparities between our worldview, for example, and our self-view, and there's a mathematical number that we look for, we're gonna incur some stress. So if how we are at home in our natural environment is so vastly different than how we are at work, there's going to be a lot of stress involved. And so just honestly, sometimes just recognizing that it comes down to the meaning that we're associating those two different worlds can be an eye-opener for a lot of people. And sometimes it can be as simple as that. But there's an example of, okay, if we can't control that stress, we might not all be in the situation to walk away from our job or change our employer or change the group that we're in. But how can we cope with it better? How can we recognize that our values are this, and our self values are this, and our work values are this, and then what coping mechanisms can we employ so that we can reduce that stress?
Yeah, and that's so that leads us to the next one, is habits. So it's important that we get in good habits. So if I look at the assessment, and whether it's taking care of your mind, body, whether it's taking care of your life, how you communicate, however it is, because we get, like I said, a nice report without going over the report. We don't want to confuse people and show them the report. But if we look at it, we say, okay, now looks like you undervalue something within this area. How can we make it a good habit? How can we practice this so we can be better at it? There's these like listening is one of them, and objective listening. And I've learned there are different types of listeners, and there's the listener that is really engaged. Yeah, how are you? I'd like to learn more, and really is there, being fully present in the dressing room, in your work, in your financial business, whatever it is, being fully present, being on with your game is important. So that's something that is you work on. And then you have the other type of person that's not really listening. They're looking at their phone while you're talking to them. They're taking notes. And I know some people personally that are CEOs that do that. And it's a bad habit to do that. And then you have I'm not going to pick on some of I know we have a few doctors in here, PhDs, but sometimes the doctor's so busy, they're kind of listening, but they're not. Right? So they're listening, and they're going to give you 10 seconds of their time, and that's it. And that, no matter what you do, you could work on yourself for the betterment of yourself, for the betterment of your team, and for the betterment of your practice or whatever you do. Tonja was in a dressing room with you coach baseball. How was it, Tonja, to try to break habits of some of your athletes that would come in?
Well, yeah, I mean, we could do a year's worth of sessions on habit breaking, right? I mean, and habits are just, behaviors that are repeated over and over and over again. And so again, I think values is an important aspect to that, because as I mentioned earlier, you have your behaviors, and then behind that, what's motivating us to act that way? What created those habits in the first place? Well, values is at the baseline. And to be honest with you, and all the work that we've done, and I think Mike would agree, nobody's talking about values. And we were at our table prior to the start of this talking with Frederick. Nobody talks about values, and yet it's such a critical component. It's like building your house on an unstable foundation. When you understand your values, just everything else can make sense. So if I'm trying to change habits, I'm going to start by understanding my players better from a value standpoint. And I mean players, not just in the athletic realm, but also those that might be on my team in business as well.
And even a good habit is properly fueling your body correctly. I do this little mind map, and I truly believe it that everybody within their life could work on these things. And it's 3 things in this mind map. And without getting into the whole map, I don't have a diagram here to do it, but there's 3 things that are very important. Your mental toughness and your mindset. Because if I work in sales, who's going to want to buy from somebody that's not fully present, or they don't really value people around them or relationships or themselves? They're not listening. So you work on that. The next thing is the physical side. People are going to say, what does that have anything to do with sales? Well, you want to be physically. I'm not talking about CrossFit or pumping iron. I'm talking about going for a walk, working on different things, breathing exercises or meditation. There's many apps. And the third thing is nutrition, properly fueling your body. And I happen to, my significant other, she's a registered dietitian, and we watched, I think it was Game Changer last night. I think that was the name of and I'm learning so much about plant-based and taking care of yourself, because I'm not I'm not a hockey player anymore. I might play pickup once a week, but for me, I want to be on my game. So I need all of these to feel better. And there's nobody than Tonja. She does have her CSCS, which is one of the highest certifications you could have. And if you work in the professional sports arena, you need this type of certification to work with athletes. How can you go from like being an athlete to business and calling it the same thing? Because Tonja, we believe in that, how you got to take care of your mind body.
Yeah, I mean, that's you have to value yourself as an individual, right? And part of that, you have to recognize that you're the tool, right? You're your biggest asset. And taking care of that, you've got to have your basic self-care. It's what I call the daily 7. You've got to make sure sleep is number 1. And most people don't value sleep as much as they should. And hydration would be number 2. Most people don't understand how important those 2 things are. Oddly enough, food is probably 3rd and exercise 4th. So we put so much emphasis in America on exercise, and it is important. Don't get me wrong, hugely important. But really, sleep, hydration, and what we put into our bodies from a fuel aspect are even more important. And then our ability to quiet the mind. Meditation is another one as well. So, when I work with athletes, I typically, and anybody, I say athletes all the time, but even my business associates and my business clients are my athletes. They're just corporate athletes. So there's about 7 things that we'll try to introduce to them in terms of just basic self-care. If you can't take care of yourself and your own as your biggest asset, you can't expect to get much out of your endeavors or your connections with other people. You just have to be able to perform, and that starts with taking care of yourself.
Yeah, and it's monumental that you take care of yourself, because you have to take care of your life. And that's where the life values come in to it when we talk about life values, because if you're taking care of yourself, it's going to rub off on the people that work around you, even in corporate America or wherever you are, because you're actually, you're bringing in, I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that I want to just throw out there before you go into the next part is that I think one of the challenges that a lot of people face, especially now, I mean, look, we've all been through a pretty rough last whatever 20 months or whatever it's been, is that sometimes I might see, for example, I'll just say me and not throw anybody else under the bus, but I might see a commercial with someone riding their Peloton and the perfect, it's always a perfect person riding a Peloton. And I'm kind of like, well, screw that. I'm not going to look like that. So why? I mean, it's going to take me forever to get there. So why even bother? Or I might be eyeing some big piece of pie and say, I really shouldn't. And they're like, I'll feel better. So I think there's so much of it is this to start where you got to clear up what's blocking you from doing some of those things first. I think you've got to say, look, you know what? Maybe I won't eat that whole piece of pie. Maybe I'll just have half of it or something, or a third of it. And then next time I'll have a little bit less, and next time I'll cut it out or something, and just try to do everything in baby steps, because they will all lead to hopefully getting you towards Mr. Stud Boy on the Peloton or whatever hell it is. I mean, I think that's because you guys are so correct. I mean, a lot of the athletes that I work with, so much of their challenges are, it's not physical, it's mental, but it's mental, just getting things going. And then once things are going, it's the momentum, right? So
that's just so to go back, that's where the first thing we talk about is that plan. So the first thing we look at the assessment, and it opens up a whole, slew of questions, and we now can go back and forth and say, is this you? Is this not you? And really put this together down to our habits, down to what I call as a measurable goal now. And a measurable goal is something that's attainable, because you mentioned it. Well, is it measurable that we can have a third of the pie instead of the whole thing? Is that measurable that we can, it's a cluttered desk is a cluttered mind. Let's clean up our desk. It's going to help us prepare. We always kept our dressing room nice, especially at the big league level. We always made sure of that. So it's not measurable though to say, okay, I want to lose 30 pounds in the next 2 weeks, or coming up with these things. And Tonja, can you give us some measurable goals that you use within the businesses that you work with?
Well, yes, that would largely depend on the business, but let's go with real estate, for example. Measurable goals would be it's a relationship-based business. So if you and let's just face it, all businesses are relationship-based. So how many meaningful connections are you have? It's not about cold calling. It's not about robo-dialing. It's not about hitting a numbers. It's about meaningful connection with others if you want to have a relationship-based business. And so one measurable goal would be, how many coffee appointments did we have this week? How many face-to-face or voice-to-voice conversations did we have with people? And so that's one measurable goal that I would work with, for example, when I'm training realtors.
That's great. So that's something that's not measurable when you just finish your exam and you're a realtor and okay, I'm going to sell 3 homes this month. I don't think that's measured. That could be part of the other goals that we're going to talk about. And I always mention, Mark, what happens in soccer if you take the goals away?
Mayhem.
You have nothing to shoot for.
Yeah.
So it's important that everyone says goals, but they have to be goals that are measurable. I use the measurable, like we talked about. Then we go to short-term goals, which is 1 to 3 months. You could, what can I do within the 1 to 3 months to make it work? And then we go into the long-term goals, where the long-term goals could be anywhere from 3 months to 3 years. And then there's that vision goal. That's the big dream. I want to be the top realtor within my company, and I'm going to do all these little things and details to get there. So we use, everybody uses a different system, but we said it to go way back. It's the briefing of the assessment. It's the person behind the assessment that's helping you with a roadmap to where you want to be. And I don't know how much time we have, Mark, but I was going to open up for questions for Tonja and I. Feel free, anybody, to ask any question if they like here.
Well, while we wait for those to pop in and so forth, what I'd like to ask is that, so you've gone through, these different segments and steps and so forth. I think right now it's a question where they, I mean, is it now where you kind of can put all this stuff together to achieve a desired result, or how do you tie that all together?
Well, okay. So how you tie it all together is you create structure within whatever you're trying to do. So if we take the life values, I've worked with many people. You have too, Mark, like people that, like a good example is the athlete. And what happens with the athlete after they're done playing, they have the identity crisis. They're not the same person. I'm not saying all athletes, but they might go down to the garden and they're not recognized like they used to. And you realize, boy, what is my purpose here? So I've used the assessment there. Also, another thing is that there's people I work with in corporate America, especially as of late, that they're losing their jobs or they're retiring. And it's the same thing. They have that identity crisis. Now what? So what we do is we look at the assessment and we use that, like I said, as the baseline. And then we put that plan together for them so they can be there. So that's the whole purpose is to find a solution to the problem. Tonja's worked with many businesses like that. Tonja, maybe you can go a little bit deeper on that.
Yeah, I think, and I noticed something in the chat here about the steps that we're talking about. I think, the whole purpose of our being here today is to talk about values and to introduce values to folks, and the assessment tool that we have that measures values. I don't think people know what values are, let alone how to assess them or understand how to use them. And so our tool is going to give you that information. In terms of steps following you obtaining that information, that's entirely up to you. One step would be that you work with a coach and you take this information that you now know and you learn how to apply it so that you can either maximize your strengths or close gaps or look for opportunities. And I think it's mostly a combination of the three of those that we look for when we talk about enhancing your performance. As I mentioned in the chat box, this assessment's based on 6 cognitive dimensions and 12 emotional intelligence factors. So there's a lot of science underneath it. Nobody needs to understand that, just like I don't need to understand how electricity works, but I like to use it. And I like to flip the light switch on and I like to do Zoom. So what do we do with this information? The next step would be, well, you're going to get a report at the end of the assessment. Then that really does a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of getting you to understand what your score means. You might have a high score, a moderate score, or a low score. As Mike mentioned earlier, whether you undervalue or overvalue certain aspects that the assessment will measure. And then you take that data and you can work with one of us using the debrief or in an extended fashion to apply that to the areas that you need the most help with. So those would be the steps in my book.
That's amazing. So do me a favor, when you have the opportunity, you don't need to do it right now, but maybe a little bit later, throw some of those steps in the chat if you could. And then secondly, why don't you each of you just give everybody, what's the best way to reach you, Tonja, but reach you, Mike, and website stuff and all that kind of thing.
Okay. Well, I have if anybody's interested in the assessment, I'm gonna have Tonja handle those if anybody gets one or feels they need one or wants one. And you use the example of the chiropractor. People usually go to the chiropractor. I liked active release. I've used it for years, but I would go, right when you're not feeling good instead of going before sometimes. So we like to use the tool with either you're feeling good or you're not feeling great. We still use this tool, and Tonja's going to put up her website. If anybody, I'm in the middle of cleaning up mine, but if you went to my website, it's Hartman.Academy, no .com, HARTMAN.Academy. And then you can take a peek over at the area where I have a healthy mindset eLearning. So I took my eLearning course and I made it for free on there. And we have like 10 things that we go over. We just talked about it. The first thing you do is you take the assessment. Second thing is we help with a plan. But in this case today, we're going to use, Tonja's going to help everybody with the life values assessment if they want it, or you can reach out to her for more information about it.
Oh, that's fantastic. And Tanya, best way to reach you? Oh, you're putting it all in there. Look at you. All right, so great, Tanya at and so forth. Find your op, or as they say in Orange County, they say the OP, I guess, or whatever it is, but not really. So got it. Now, well, here's what we're going to do in a couple minutes. There's one question we're going to touch on in a sec, and then we'll go back to the table.
.com, I'm sorry. Hartman.academy, no.com.
Correct. Oh, yeah, you'll fix it. So a quick question. Can you, someone asked, can you expand on fueling your body properly and what that looks like on a daily basis?
Well, the first thing I could share is the dietitian was on earlier. I'm not an expert at properly fueling your body. Everybody does it differently. And the last thing I would ever do is give examples of that. Tanya, I don't know if she even feels that comfortable doing that, but she could probably tell you a little bit. I could tell you it's not, Mark, it's not putting that full cake in your mouth. That one thing I can guarantee. But or that pie. Right? But proper. I mean, it's important. I really believe that finding people that do have the degrees that could do it and people that have the background. I don't want to offend anybody, but I think it's important that, I'm always going to look for somebody like a dietitian, like somebody like with Tanya that has her degrees and her background and her CSCS, just because we don't want to hurt ourselves. I could leave the message where you could reach Cheryl for nutrition. She can, we talked, I can leave her information. You can go to her website and ask a question, and I'm sure she would love to help you. She was one of the original people with Chobani, the Greek yogurt company, and did all their nutrition and worked in the schools in New York and even did stuff at the White House.
Wow.
And yeah, so, but when it comes to the assessments, Tanya's the person to go to. So I'll put down Cheryl's information here.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. That is for another session. That's such a highly individualistic plan and process. I mean, I guess the simplest rules are what I love by Michael Pollan, right? Eat good stuff and not enough and not too much of it. But beyond that, it's really an individualized approach to that. So.
Excellent. Well, listen, you've both been fantastic. And so, I mean, I'm seeing people's comments and people that had to leave that telling me about this. The information you're offering is fantastic, and I know it can obviously go into much greater depth. And I want people to take this seriously because we're all hopefully at some point there's going to be a rebound from all this madness, and there's going to be. I'm hopeful and very optimistic that next year will be fantastic, and I think this is a great way by. I think taking an assessment, like if you know what you're sort of up against and what you're not just battling, but what you have going in your favor, it's just so much easier. I'll give you a quick analogy. And one thing I like to tell the athletes who I work with is that, a lot of times when they leave their sport, they're thrown into the ocean and they're on a life raft and they're in the middle of this vast ocean. And they don't know what direction to paddle, and they're strong. They've got a big paddle, they're big muscles. They can paddle really well, but they just don't know what direction to go. And a lot of times, all they need to see is that one little island that's over there to say, "Oh, that's where I need to go." And I have a feeling that this assessment is the same sort of thing, where it's providing that island, that tropical island, that destination. Like, go towards here. This is what you need to be successful, to be over there. And so I think. I mean, you both have been fantastic. I really appreciate it. I really do.
Yeah, Mark, I just want to add to that real quick if I can. I know we're wrapping up, but
sure.
One of the things I like to think of the assessments as sort of the same thing you were talking about, kind of a GPS type analogy.
Yeah.
Only it's not where we're going to. And this is where most people miss the mark. It's where you're starting from, right? Because if you don't have a solid starting point, you don't know who you are, what you value, what your behaviors are, what your motivators are, it's very difficult to plug that coordinate in and have those directions be accurate. So our assessments can work with anybody. They can be added to any training program that you can imagine, anything, any industry. It's just a foundational piece of information, that starting point, that launch point that you must know. And, you mentioned athletes. I mean, we have assessments for career transition. We have assessments for change behavior. We have change readiness, I should say. Our Ready to Play assessment is one of the top tools that every athlete in America should take. Not to plug ourselves, but I'm going to. 74 different assessments. You name me an industry, and I've got something that Mike and I have something that can help you. So thanks for having us.
Yeah, fantastic. Michael, any final thoughts? Are you good?
No, it's great. I hope this is, I hope we were clear, because part of what the assessment does, it helps with clarity. But I hope we were clear on this, and we don't want to go too deep. Tonja, you said it really well, like too deep into the science and on how it works. There's all these different tens of millions of possibilities with the assessment. We do know one thing: the reliability scores don't lie. And I've had a lot of people that where we use this reliability score, and we could see right away if you took it correctly, how long you took it. And I've had people that I said, I had to ask them, are you sure you took this correct? And they would say, yeah. And one person says, well, I'm not happy with my life. And that's right away where I said, well, that's not what we do. I'm not a therapist. You really need to talk to a professional about this. I've had a dentist tell me he didn't want to live anymore, and it showed it in the report. And I said, I can't work with you. So the tool is good, and we use it for like we said, it is a good starting point. And I use this, sometimes with this analogy where sometimes, when you're going full speed ahead, you're going north, everything, wow, you're great, man. Things are great. And if you're going south, you're going the wrong way. That's where you're stuck in that ocean. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I'm stuck. I don't know what to do with myself. And sometimes we're a little sideways. We're stuck. Okay, how do we become unstuck and not be so sideways? We just have to get to the middle a little bit. And the goal is, after you take the assessment, after you work with Tonja, after you understand this, after you see where you are now, where you want to be, the how, the what, the why, that we want to help you get on track to go full speed ahead. And
I love it.
Yeah,
that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's the best I could say for that, for sure.
That's great. Well, both Mike and Tonja, again, truly appreciate you being here. I mean, this is, just what we're trying to strive for here in the Clubroom and Win Again Academy. And both of you really have sort of left an imprint. And I do encourage everybody to reach out to both Mike and Tonja, not just in a little bit when we go back to the tables, but also going forward. So thanks again for being here.
Thanks, everyone.
Great.